So I'm Cynthia Cusick. I am the Artisan. I call my studio T-Horse Studio. So this is a selection of some of my pottery. And this is actually where I work. I work on the left side. Yes, that is the left side. On that garage, and I'm hoping to actually expand into the right side. Much to the chagrin of my husband, who thought he still had some of the garage, but he doesn't anymore. That will be going away. Okay, so my background. I'm not from this area. I grew up in a town called Eastchester in Westchester County. It's just north of the Bronx, so for all intents and purposes, I'm a New Yorker. I grew up in a one-bedroom apartment with 3 brothers and 1 sister and my 2 parents. And so it was small. You have to think about a lot of people in a small place. And we were spread out. My oldest brother is 16 years older than me, and I am the next to youngest. There's an 8-year gap between my next older brother, who's Jimmy, and myself. So there were 3 kids, and then a bit of a gap, and then Larry and I came at the end. But at one point, I think Mike was off in college. Most of us were in the apartment together. So what that does is it gives you it makes you crazy. And it also, for me at least, you're always looking for a place to escape. So my escape was to play outside, because there's no really place to play inside. So when we play outside, the street that I grew up on actually was made with, I would say, about 18 different large apartment buildings, but they're very grand apartment buildings, and they line both sides of the street with one-way direction on either side, parking and huge trees. It's very, very pretty. It's just down from Scarsdale Village. I mean, there's a lot of money there. It's very, very nice. And behind those apartments is the Bronx River Parkway, which was one of the original parkways in the United States. And the rich people used to come up in their motor cars, brand new motor cars in the 20s and 30s, and drive up the Bronx River Parkway. And these buildings originally were built so that the wealthier people could come up and have a stay in the country on the weekends. So a lot of these apartment buildings, not ours apparently, had bedrooms in them, but some of them had maids' rooms off the side, so you'd come up with your maid and very chic, very nice. So behind these buildings is a grassed and wooded area on either side of the river. So as a kid, that's where I went. I went down to the river, I played in the trees. Even though I lived in an apartment, I was out in nature, and that was my way of escaping from being in such a tiny place. I also, because that's what a lot of girls do, became obsessed with horses at a very early age, and I was very nice. It was nice for me, at least, when I was 12 or 13. I got about a year's worth of riding lessons at a local stable. So my parents couldn't really afford it, but they did it for a year, and that sort of sowed the seed. Then I had to give it up because you're in the New York area, and you can't afford that stuff if you don't have money. So I put that kind of in the back of my mind. One day it would be nice if I could own a horse. So then a lot of my artistic expression started with just drawing and painting, things you could do inside in the house. I drew horses a lot. I drew anything else I could find. And eventually, when I got out of high school, I got my associate's degree, look at that, that's cute, and liberal arts humanities, and most of my electives were art. So at that point, I still didn't feel like I was very much an artist. I had to be practical, but I still gravitated towards the artist. Then I moved to New York City in 1984 and lived in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, which is now a very trendy area. But at the time I lived there, it was a very slummy area, high in crime, but cheap in rent. So at that time, I started working in graphic design and worked for restaurants, and I worked for this little studio called Studio T on Union Square, and we did all of the posters for all the bands that would go through the Ritz and CBGBs and all the clubs and stuff. Yeah, so at the time I'm doing that, and now I realize, hey, that was pretty cool. But it was just my job. But I learned a lot in graphic design, and the guy who ran the studio, Fernando Natalici, was a Brazilian. He used to put on the weirdest music when we worked. And he was also a photographer and did a lot of movie stills for independent and low-budget films. And so he would throw me a roll of film, like at the end of the week was my paycheck. He'd say, here's a roll of film, here's your camera, just take some pictures. So that's what started a lot of my photography work. I did photography, and then I started to do altered photography. We would print in his darkroom, put the prints on like a matte surface paper, and then hand color them in oils. And So I started working that way. Over the next 15 years, I moved in several places. I went to London, England, because my first husband went to school there for a year. I went to Keene, New Hampshire. We went up there. We traveled around the United States. And then eventually I got divorced from him and moved back to Brooklyn, and I went back to Williamsburg, and then eventually to Greenpoint, because Williamsburg rents at that time were just going through the roof, and Greenpoint was cheaper. So that was my travel. I got to go out and see the United States and parts of the world. At least I wasn't stuck in the apartment anymore. Then I moved from Greenpoint in a truck and drove out here to live with my sister in Irvine. So there was no gradual move from the city to the country. It was just, if we're going to do this, we're going to do this. So I moved out and lived for 7 months with my sister. Which is another story.
Why? Were you just tired?
How did your sister get to Irvine?
My sister moved out here because her husband got a job, and he worked in sheet metal and as a defense subcontractor. So there was a job opportunity, and she also has moved around the United States in several places.
Okay.
And so she felt that she didn't mind leaving New Jersey, and she thought, yeah, what the hell, and so let's go to Kentucky, and she did. And when I said, I'm sick of New York and the rents are getting way out of hand, and she said, why don't you try Kentucky? And I said, well, I'll take a look. And I came out, and I thought it's a low cost of living, and I have nothing tying me down anymore, so why not? Her advice to me was, you can always move back. Well, realistically, when you leave New York, you don't move back because it costs too much money, one way or the other. So initially, because I had so much experience in graphic design, I did that here. I worked for the local newspaper. I did a couple of little publications, people that I met out here that needed some production work. And eventually I went back to get my bachelor's degree at EKU when I left the newspaper. But when I went there, I thought, well, I'll get it in graphic design. I'll get all these credits for having life experience. And then I thought to myself, I've been doing this for almost 18 years. Why am I going to give a piece of paper saying I have a certificate in this when I've already been doing it? It's like I don't need to prove this. So I went into the studio art direction. And in that, when you do that course, you have to take all your foundation courses, which included the ceramics course. And initially I declared that I would do jewelry as my major, as my concentration, because I had done a little costume jewelry work back in Brooklyn. And so I enjoyed that, and I want to get back into metals or whatever. But my ceramics professor said to me, you need to be a ceramics major. So I decided to double on both of them. And that's what I eventually got my degree in, was studio art with concentrations in both metals and pottery. Some days when I'm slugging 50-pound boxes of clay, I think I probably should have concentrated on jewelry, but I like getting my hands in clay. So after I graduated, I started T-Horse Studio that same year with equipment that I was able to purchase on a discount from the school that they were getting rid of, and cobbled together some things and made a little space for myself in that garage. And then ever since then, I've been just expanding things. At first I just used to work down one side of the garage, and it was open to everything else, and it was freezing in the winter. And then eventually we got a little money, and we closed off a section for me with a door, still no heat. And now we're gonna expand to the whole garage, which we will do. I talked to Scott about that. But this winter I walked in one day and I thought, we're definitely getting heat because this is ridiculous. I've been doing this too long. Okay, so my influences on my work come from a number of different places. Nature, obviously, and the outdoors. Textures, anything that's got a good feel to it or some complication to look at really intrigues me. Microscopic matter, the little things that you can't see and then you see up close. Seed pods and fungi, I mean, this is the stuff that when I go out on my walks, I'll be walking with the dogs, and then I'll be down on the ground with my camera taking a picture of some kind of moss or something. There's a moss, I obviously don't know what the name of it is, but it grows, it's some kind of a lichen. It's a really light green, and it's like a net pattern. And when it blooms, I guess you could call it. It sends up these little hairs that come up in these bright, bright red. Oh, it's just the color combination alone makes me excited. Mathematics and science concepts like the Fibonacci sequence, or what they call the golden, not the golden rule. Yeah, no, that's just the Fibonacci. The golden rule is the perspective one. And that spiral shows up in nature constantly. You see that it's just a part of the natural world around us and the physics world. So that shows up a lot in my work, especially the spiral. You'll see it here. It's a sunflower in the middles of flowers. Particle physics, quantum mechanics, very much love science, and my brother Jimmy is big on astronomy, and he still tries to teach me all the star patterns, and I still don't get it. His daughter Allison is a biologist, and she's been all around the world, and so we'll have very different conversations, not about art, but about science, and so I find this stuff very interesting. And the concept of time, and you can see these spirals keep coming up. And this in particular, I love this diagram I found, what people think time is and what it actually is, and how people think of time as a linear concept, as just one line. But in fact, if you think about your life and how many times something's happening, it brings you back to a moment in your childhood, or a moment where you were grocery shopping somewhere, or something else where you seem like that deja vu feeling. Things happen, and then there's a point where they cross, and then events move away from each other, or they spiral into one another. And I'm always fascinated by those touch points where things happen at a particular point in time, and then they just seem to move away from each other. It's like the idea of where you want to, you make a friend, you're going to be close to that friend, and then you find yourself drifting away from them. But you're still friends with them, but you don't see them as much anymore. So I see that as like almost a Venn diagram of your common experiences crossing. Prehistoric art. Absolutely love just the idea of our human selves being a continuous thing. There's a very, if you read a lot of art history books and the way art history was taught, and even anthropology, there's a tendency when they describe how humans develop as if somehow we're the most advanced, and that humans back then were a knuckle dragging caveman. Well, the caveman produced this, and that's to me a very sophisticated level of thought and expression. So in a lot of ways, rather than feeling like we're very distant from our ancestors, we are still our ancestors walking around, because that to me is beautiful. There's a lyric and line there in the color that was done 35,000 years ago. And so sometimes I'll just sit and I'll think about that, and it just blows my mind.
They had more time to sit. Well, you'd say don't have, but they weren't as distracted as we are today.
But not everybody did this. That's the thing. There were people that were it was what they were compelled to do. So the idea of the artist is still there. And
they were compelled to do it. That's what
and I find
they
that
order their colors up, online.
No, but they had it there around them, and that ability to solve that problem is no different than our ability to solve a problem of trying to eradicate a disease or whatever. I guess my point being is that we're still very much the same people. So that's a nice connection, going back and spiraling back in time, that we're not just so far away from it. And prehistoric equine imagery, this shows up a lot in my work. Modern art abstraction. You cannot live in the New York area and not know art. When I was doing my art foundation course, I think it was the 2D course, my professor came up to me after the second day or whatever, and he said, "What are you doing in this class?" I said, "You have to take it." He goes, "You could teach this class." I said, "I know, but that's not the point, because you just get exposed to it. If you go on a field trip in New York, you're going to see this. And most people don't have that. Well, nowadays you can, because you can get out on the internet, you can see it. You can go to your local library and tap into networks where you can actually see this work. But to see it in person is a very different thing. And you're very lucky if you live in a major metropolitan area to see art like that. So that's Mondrian is one of my favorites, Louise Bourgeois. which I just love her work on the female self, I guess. Miro, absurdity, I just love the lines, the colors, the abstraction, and of course Georgia O'Keeffe. Let me just get that spiral in there. Symbols, marks, and typography. I have a very heavy graphic design background, so that will show up in my work. Sculptures. Now my sculptural work, when I started that, really just came out of playing with the clay and more of an organic thing. And what started to happen from that, as I learned to, as an artist, a lot of times when I would draw or paint, most of what I did was 2D. There's a tendency, at least in my beginning classes, the idea of, why are you doing this? There's always the question, why did you put this mark here? Why did you paint that way? And I always felt very judged and unprepared for the answer. Like, I don't know why I did that. But if I couldn't come up with a reason why, then I wasn't a real artist. Because a real artist would know why they did that. And as I got older and more mature, I realized that sometimes you have to trust your intuition. And sometimes you don't know why you did something until you've done it already. And then you have the perspective to stand back from it and look and say, what does this mean? What am I trying to tell myself? So when I did my sculptures initially, they started to take on a very, I guess, feminine form. They were egg-shaped, they were pod-shaped, they were started to have very bumpy textures on it, and so I started to just make things, which was the best advice. I just make stuff. And then afterwards I asked myself, when I looked at my work, what am I talking about? Well, at the time I was going through, and I still am, perimenopause, so a lot of it was about femininity and maturity and sexuality and what that all meant to me. So a lot of these are biomorphic abstract forms. I combine them with mixed media. I have done pieces that are just gourds, but I just put up the clay ones here. This is one of the initial, and it's reminiscent of a pot, your traditional pot that has the opening on the top. Right? It's a biomorphic form. This is a wood-fired form, but I keep the top on it, so it's not a closed form where it just looks like a seed pod. It's something you think of as a container, so it's almost like a crossover with pottery, right, and not just strictly fine art. This was more reminiscent of the gourds that I started growing on my property and was obsessed with at the time, and more of a pinched, this is called pinch form. And then I started to break into doing textures. So this piece is probably about that big. And it's got silk on it, I think. It was my sister's. And I just started combining forms. Grounded flight. And this is where I started adding drawings. So all of those things start to cross over. And even the textures on the pod pieces themselves, a lot of that comes from my walks and what I see underfoot, the tree bark and the fungus and anything else. And that's the idea of being stuck, wanting to get away from your family life, but not having the wherewithal to, the grounded flight. You cannot actually fly away from that. This is also brings in some of the beads that I used to use in my jewelry work. This piece I liked, Trap Climax. That is my, I guess would be the visual of what an orgasm would look like, if I can put it. Beginnings of an ulcer, although this was done well before my mother moved to Kentucky. I guess I was kind of predicting where I was going with that.
That's funny that it follows after the orgasm.
Yeah, right? I gotta think about that, was it? Idle isthmus. And this is my kind of comment on just the choice I made to not have children. So it's a lot of the stuff I think about are questions about what defines being a woman. And then very often, culturally, particularly in the United States, the idea of being a mother, which makes sense because when you look at the species, fertility has always been a very big thing, but now we're at a point where you can have those choices. So if you choose not to have children, does that make you less of a woman? And, what value do we place on that? Because I still have this part of my body, right? We all have those parts even if they don't get used. So what, how do I feel about how I define myself as a female. This could probably be related to the beginnings of an ulcer too. Maybe I should call it acid reflux.
Always crack me up.
So there's just some of the, and a lot of these are, of the sculptural pieces are done with stoneware, and then I'll just fire them. Sometimes I'll do underglazes and fire them again, or sometimes I will just paint acrylic on them. It depends on what I think is suitable.
Where's that work at, Cindy? Where do you show this?
Most of my sculptural work has been in galleries around Tennessee. I've had a few pieces. The Uncomfortable Surprise piece was in the Lexington Art League's biennial a couple years ago. Let's see, Tennessee, Chicago, California. Usually the exhibits that I've applied to have been outside of the area. A number of them in Tennessee. I don't know why. They like me in Tennessee. So, yay for that. Now the pottery went in a slightly different direction. It started, there were some related things. Oh look, it's Cindy at the wheel. So you can still see some of those themes of the textures, like here, those little diamond patterns, and I started to try and almost force a crossover on it, carving into the pots, using the textures. These take a long time. Then you run into the practicality thing. If I'm spending this much time on a pot, can I seriously ask $65 for this?
Yeah.
I can. There it will sit, you know, and I've got to find the market for that. So I can still do that, but I have to figure out how to present that, because a cup like this can take sometimes 2 or 3 days just to carve, never mind the glazing part of it. And there's a little teapot. So then I started to work on concentrating on some of the techniques that I use, which are carving, underglazing, and some mishima. Now the mishima technique I'll get to a little later. It's I don't use it as much because you actually inlay your colored slip into the surface of the clay and scrape it back so that it's smooth. Whereas the carving, when I carve in and I put my underglaze in the lines and I wipe it back, there's still a depression. So there's texture on top of the surface of the piece. So it's slightly different. So then I moved into carving my 2D art, which I had used to do my horse drawings, whatever, into my pots and trying that. And then just working some of the prehistoric type drawings in my own hand onto some of the pieces. I love my buffalo. And this is a lot of the, where did I do this? This is soda fired. Where is this? I think this, I want to say this was at Bobtown Farm, just outside of here, when we worked at their soda kiln, but it could be at another, because I've done wood firings at Bobtown, I've done them at EKU, I've done them at UK, I've done them at Bill Witt's place out in Waco. I've done wood firings in a number of different places.
Did you see the announcement from Bobtown that they're opening up their kilns for?
Yes.
That's amazing.
They're doing, in fact, Bobtown is doing a wood firing that a bunch of us potters are going to do April Fool's weekend. I only have a few pots, but I go to the firings anyway because, you know, we just sit around and BS.
That's great.
This is actually an electric fired piece that almost looks wood fired.
They're actually going to do classes out there. I think that would be really cool. They're going to do classes out there for
Yeah.
beginners. I think
Yes.
that'd be cool.
He's been wanting to do that. Clarence has been wanting to do classes at Bobtown for some time, and then he and Vicki have been trying to get all of the resources together, the wheels, and so it's a slow process, but I think it's nice to see that they're finally at the point. A lot of the equine stuff that I do now are these blue horses. When I was growing up, I used to draw a lot of horses, and then it gets to the point where you get away from that, and then your folks see you or your relatives see you. Oh, why don't you draw horses anymore? It's 'cause I don't do that anymore. You don't want to do it. And you come out and you think you're in the Lexington area, and there's horses out there. That'd be the most obvious thing, and my tendency is to let's not do the most obvious thing. But you know what? There is a way to kind of marry it. My way of doing the most obvious thing and not making myself feel terrible about it. And honestly, these are some of my best-selling pieces, are the equine pieces. But I'm doing it with the voice that I have. I'm not trying to create some people are very good at I have a friend, Robin Fassis in Irvine. She's a wonderful watercolorist and acrylic and oil, and she does the, realistic portraits of horses, and she has horses. And I can do that if I gave myself the time and the wherewithal to make the mistakes and go back. But she does it better than I do, and I'm better at doing it in my weird, quirky little voice. And that's important as an artist, to have your weird, quirky little voice and to get it out there, because anybody can copy a style. But it's a different thing to at least put your little flag up and say, this is me, this is what I do. And so, as I guess it's kind of an homage to the ancestors kind of thing. That's why I stick with some of this.
I know if I were to see this piece beside a drawn, painted, watercolor, beautiful painting of a horse, I would want the one that's more unique.
Well, and I think that's where that's why.
Because we're so oversaturated with all of that locally, and I would want the unique piece.
And that's a personal struggle as an artist, that it sounds, especially now that I'm over 50, it sounds, I say it to myself and I think, well, why did it take so long to figure that out? But that it's an expectation that people are expecting the perfect, people are expecting the most realistically rendered. And then when you do a doodle, or you do something that just comes lightly out of your hand, that somehow has less value in it. But I think it was the point where my husband, I was drawing something, I don't know what it was, I was trying to describe something to him that we needed to get done. So I just took a piece of paper out and I drew it. And he said, that is magic what you do. He said, I can't do that. And I thought, okay, I guess there is something to that, because I don't even think about it. And then his brother looked at another little piece I did, and he was just, and it took me a while to just step back and watch somebody's reaction and really absorb it and give it some respect, because that's what I hadn't been doing. It's like, well, yes, but it's not perfect.
The only perfect horse paintings that really can get a lot of money are the ones that where people commission someone to actually paint their horse.
Sure, and that's
so
a commission.
it is to look like that horse. Right. But if you're just wanting to, if you just want something with a horse on it, I don't want it to look like someone else's commissioned copy
and this
print
does
work.
evoke,
and that does not.
Right, and this evokes an emotion.
Yeah.
In its own simplicity, there's
and
a lot you can.
The original painting of this print that I'm looking at. Or whatever.
Exactly. So, and these are some of the mugs.
These are just so great.
And my buffalo.
This is all the that prehistoric part.
Yes.
Like, I really see that in it.
I
always kind of felt it, but I didn't really have the word for it.
And there's a number of times, like I'll use, like in some of these marks here, if you look, these little stamps, and those are just found objects on the farm. Screw ends, horseshoe nails, whatever. Just to throw something in there. And that's a practice thing for me, to make sure that I keep it loose and I don't try to overthink it or over-design it. To a large degree, when doing graphic design, you have to be very precise and make sure things are straight and square and whatever. And for me, the artistic part of it is getting away from it. So this is a close-up of when I'm in my greenware leather hard stage. The marks that I make, this is made with a screw end without the little end part of the screw where the threads are, and you're just twisting it. So I actually incise into the clay, and I'll wipe up the little crumbs and whatnot, and then I will probably bisque it once, where you fire it so that it's like a flower pot type of consistency. It still absorbs the glaze, but it's firm enough where you can handle it, you don't have to worry about breaking it. And I will put an underglaze over the whole thing, and the black will settle in those grooves, and I'll take a sponge and wipe it away, and it will leave the black in the lines. And then you fire it up, and this piece was fired in a wood-fired kiln. And this was one of my favorite things that actually sold just recently, so I'm really on that. Now the other technique I could use is, which I've done on a couple of pieces, and I think you guys may have them on display out here. There's the starfish plate. Did you put that out? I don't know if it's out.
There's a couple of plates up there. I can't remember if it's
well, the starfish in particular is done with the mishima technique, and it looks slightly different and it feels different. The other this pot here, if you put your fingers over it, you would feel. And that's an important thing for me too on my pots, is that I like them to be felt, because I forget who the potter was. I'll say Linda Christensen. There was a woman who was talking about getting one of her pots, and she said she got one of her cups, and it wasn't this woman's best cup, but she got it at an NCECA convention, and she was just so excited to get one of this woman's cups, and she paid, you know, a little less because the potter said it wasn't the best glaze or whatever. It was a little rough. But she used it all the time. She always had her tea out of it, and she said she realized that what she loved about it is because it was rough. When she would pick it up and drink her tea, she always knew where her lips were on the cup by the feel of it, and she would just do it absent-mindedly. And that tactile thing, even if it's just an incised line, you can pick up the cup and just know whether you have it the right way, you know, or that's your favorite thing. I'm really big on understanding the appreciation of handmade items, and one of the conclusions I've sort of come to for myself is finding the perfection in imperfection. That rather than looking for the absolutely perfectly rendered line, when you mess up, when you think you've got the smooth curve and you've got that little jog at the end, that's what the Japanese call wabi-sabi. That's the beauty in it, is the lack of perfection, and that's what makes us human. So those are the things that I look for. On the mishima technique, the bolded area, you incise the design in the body in your leather hard clay, you fill it with a contrasting colored clay or slip, and then you cover it with a glaze. What you also do back here, they're sort of demonstrating it, and I can carve in a few things on the lines there. You actually scrape back, so you cover it, it makes a mess in your lines, and then you let it dry a little bit, and you scrape it back. And so I can show you a little bit of that now. But that's the slide portion of mine.
It reminds me of a Zen garden.
Yes, and it was the Koreans used a lot of it. I think this is the right texture, and hopefully I won't make a mess on here. I can do it on a flat piece too. Now let's see what I got. I was reconstituting my slips here. I'll try black. So what do I draw? Actually, I should have practiced that. Oh, horse. Okay.
Or a kitty cat.
We'll do a horse.
Or a kitty cat.
I've done cats. Oh, I gotta be careful. I'm gonna get clay on him.
Kitty cat? Is that what?
It has kitty cat.
I didn't know that.
Okay, so I'll just freehand this. A lot of the horses that I do, it's funny when I draw, I almost try and see it before I draw it, so I kind of have an idea of the proportions, and then my hand just goes.
So you take that moment to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense.
I mean, I have another tool sometimes that I use where I'll get in there and it's a rubber tip and it'll give me a little bit of a ghost line. I mean, it helps that I've been drawing horses for a long time, that I kind of know the basic body structure. But it's amazing what you can get away with just faking a few things, because you suggest it, and that's what I like, is the power of suggesting and allowing, back to those science concepts, allowing the mind to perform closure and finish the rest of it, which makes my job easier because I only have to do a certain amount, and then your mind will fill in the rest. So for the cave art type feel, most of it is exaggerated limbs, and where the original drawings at Lascaux were done, probably modeled after, I'm probably going to say this wrong, Przewalski's horse, which is, it's a breed of horse that actually exists out in the Asian steppes, and it's genetically different than our modern horse that we all know here. They still exist out there. They're short, stubby, and brown, and they look like those drawings. And
Like the blue one? Like the blue horse?
no, not like the blue ones. Let's go back to my influences. Past the sex stuff. There we go. That little guy up there. They still look like that. So those and I love that horse. I mean, it's just because they got the what they call feathers on the fetlocks here. You know, and you get that with horses, especially out in the field. They grow extra long hair to keep their joints warm, and so that's all there in the drawing. So that's why I always get a kick out of, you know, the idea that the prehistoric man is somehow less developed. It's like, but they notice that. They know.
No, I said I need to grow feathers on my joints.
Yes. Wouldn't that be nice? But then I'd have hairy hands if I needed to, right? Okay, so I'm just gonna get some of these little pills off.
I have a little trash can.
I can get rid of that later. I'm just trying to collect them in one place.
Oh, do you want to keep them?
No. I just want to make sure I'm not creating a mess here.
Oops.
Okay, so with mishima, you know, normally my designs I carve in a little bit, because all I need is enough for the underglaze to kind of get in there. With mishima, you just want it a little bit deeper, because you're going to fill it with the slip, and then you're going to scrape the top layer off. So if it's not deep enough, you'll end up scraping all of your design off. On some of the pots that I've seen that were done in Korea, and God knows when, they're, I mean, they go all out. You know, scenes of birds on tree branches and blossoms, and most mishima is done, of the examples that I've seen at least, with one color, and they will put a glaze on it that's usually called a celadon glaze. It's a clear glaze that maybe will have a slightly amber hue to it. It's see-through, so you can see the slip marks, or it'll be a slightly greenish color. Let's see if I can cut these off.
Yeah, that's what Walmart uses, that celadon with the green.
Yeah, and that's usually done with, I think, an iron oxide or copper oxide, depending on whether you want green or a brown. So I'm gonna, I just want to get some of these pills out so that when I fill it.
Is that clay that you're using? What is that?
This is clay, yeah.
Oh.
It's called leather hard. And it could,
is like the leather.
yeah, it could probably stand to be a little bit drier even if I wanted to. But this will work hopefully now. What do I do with that? There it is. I'll spray this everywhere. I was trying to reconstitute my slips because everything dried out while I was away in New York. Alright, so hopefully this will come out. And I don't have to be neat, I just have to fill those lines. See, if this clay was a little bit drier, it would actually suck this stuff up. Really talented people, she said, disparaging herself, do what they call slip drawing. They'll take these bottles with these pin ends and black slip, and they'll just draw directly on the clay using the bottle as a pen. But it's a technique where you really have to practice a lot on just learning to use the bottle as a drawing instrument. And I'm one of those people that has crappy penmanship, and I'm still trying to use the pen as a drawing instrument. One thing at a time. A needle tool is not what I can handle. Right, so now here's the fun part where we just gotta sit and have a nice chat, because it's gotta soak in there just a little bit. You don't have to have a blow dryer, do you? Or a really hot bulb. Something that'll
Say no.
The projector bulb's probably
Sure.
pretty warm.
No, you can, I mean, it's hard to see but as you see the edges on it, they start to get that dull color there, so it starts to soak in, and that's what I'm trying to do, is just drop into those lines
And
like
then
that.
will all that, you will
I'll
make all
scrape
that
it
go
off.
away
Yeah.
after it
So
dries?
So
Mhm.
whatever's soaked in stays, and whatever's in you scrape off.
Yeah,
Okay.
so if you think about it, you're creating this ditch, and
Mhm.
you're filling the ditch with the black dirt, and then you just come back with a blade and you scrape off the top of it, but you still, so now you have a flat surface, but the ditch area has still got the black in there, so,
It's all sooty now.
yeah. But on a mishima technique, normally what you do is you'll just put a clear celadon glaze over it, and just, it's your drawing that you're showing off. Because of the way that I tend to do my work, that make you sick to your stomach yet? I fill in with underglazing, and that goes back to just the colors and the color blocking and that kind of thing. So I find that sketching into the clay and having that depression allows me to paint the underglazes in. If I had the mishima, because it'd all be one surface, I'd more than likely just paint right over the lines. I'm one of those people where, when I have my coloring books, I hated coloring outside the lines.
So like on this, did you do those circles behind and then did the
Well, that's
Did you
taken
wanna
me a
talk
while to
about
figure some of that out. Now, a lot of this is problem solving. The circles are actually cookie cutters that
Okay.
I just, in different sizes. One of them was I guess it's a donut cutter. It was 2 rings, you know, the inside ring or whatever, and I cut them apart so I had different sizes on it. So I'll put the cookie cutters on and I will intersect them and then try and come up with interesting patterns. It would be nice to be able to do one layer of it, but then it becomes a production process where, okay, you get fired the first time, and you get fired the second time. So I've actually gotten to the point where I will just paint different sections. So.
Yeah, is it only the black outline that has the depression?
Yeah. Yeah.
The rest is just surface?
That's one of my favorite parts of doing all this is, you know, I was joking with Buddy Dobbins. You know Buddy Dobbins is? Okay. And because we talk shop all the time, and so we'll talk about pottery, you know, and not the happy moments. We'll just gripe about it to each other. And I said to him the other day, do we like any of this? Why is it we're always like complaining about every part of it? Oh, I hate putting handles on, I hate glazing. But I actually, you know, you like the whole thing, but at any given moment you're like, oh, I have to do all this work.
I think that's anybody's
Any job,
passion
right,
job,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. I
What
like
do
the
you
whole
like about
thing,
it,
but
there's parts
other
that you
people-
don't like about it.
But when I carve in and do the drawings, then I have to biscuit, and then it's hard, and then I put the glaze on it. And my favorite part at that point is actually wiping it back, because it's as if the cartoon appears.
Yeah.
This thing that looks like shadows, and I can kind of see my drawing, suddenly now comes to life as a drawing, and then I can color it. And then of course when it comes out of the kiln, it's never what you expect. I have a big glob of this stuff.
What did you say just a minute ago? It was a Japanese word, it was 2 words.
Wabi sabi.
Wabi sabi.
Yeah.
I'll have to think of wasabi. Wabi sabi.
Wabi sabi, and I did not know that term until I was contacted by somebody in some web magazine. They wanted to do a little article, like a paragraph on one of my pieces for their Wabi Sabi Day. And I was like, oh, sure, I think I want you to do this, you know, and
Define wabi sabi.
is that like a good thing or a bad
Is
thing?
it a
But then I went to the
terrorist thing? Is it my
website.
neighbor's terrorist?
Yeah, and I went to the website and it was like, okay, this is a good thing, so yes, you can do that. And but it's the idea of finding perfection in the imperfect. And you know, it goes back to the whole nature thing for me. If you look at any tree and you say that's a beautiful tree or that's a beautiful mountain, I mean, it's not perfect, but that's what makes it so amazing. All right, so this is kind of gummy, but I'm gonna go ahead and do this anyway, and just. And I have pills.
Well, it just rolls right off. doesn't
Yeah.
it?
And it's kind of getting hard here. So now, like I said, if it was a harder drier clay, it might work a little bit better because it would soak in there. So when I'm carving, you know, pushing the clay away and it's creating these little pills behind it, and some of that gets in the lines. But it gives you an idea of what the limitations of it, and then how deep you would really have to carve to get certain kinds of drawings. And what I've been experimenting with is different colors. Because this is a black slip, so I'm starting to actually scrape the drawing away.
But you could use any color, right?
Exactly, so I have what they call mason stains, that color, so this is very light, it's very hard to see, but it'll give you an idea of how much deeper I would have to go to get to drop that color in there, and it's smooth. So if it was a drier clay, you know, it would be scraping it and create dust, and I won't go there with that. But eventually what you want to do is you want to scrape so you get all of this surface stuff out of the way, and it will leave that drawing in there. But touching it, it should be fairly smooth. This has still got some bumps in it. But that's different than on my mugs and my other pieces. So that is essentially a mishima technique.
Wabi-sabi, mishima.
Yeah, I know, right? Well, I think it was the Chinese and I think was it the Japanese or the Koreans or the Chinese? Somewhere in Asia was where a lot of pottery techniques were essentially invented, and kilns and that kind of thing. So that's where you get a lot of that from. So a lot of the terminology comes from that. So yeah, so lastly, that's where I sell my things. At the Arts Council, the nice people at the Arts Council are kind enough to sell my work, which by the way, I do have some running chickens and yes, it is coming. Here's the deal. Cindy had problems with her kiln. She went to get it repaired. It was repaired. Went to fire it and it didn't work. And even Link said to me, this is an old kiln, I don't work on these anymore, I'm doing it because it's you and you're a friend of mine, but really they're just, and that's the reason she goes, I call them Craigslist kilns because they're all manual, they don't make parts for them anymore. She butchered off of somebody else's kiln. And it works, but it won't get up to the temperature I need. So what that means is I have to bite the bullet and invest in a professional computer controlled kiln. So the downside is going to cost me some money. The upside is it has much larger capacity. And when people say, we really need more of your work, I can say, not a problem, and I can then produce it. But the downside of that, of course, is I've got to get it ordered and out and tested and all that stuff. So
and I find people that have large kilns, they want their kiln to be full before they do anything. So sometimes we're waiting and waiting.
Yeah. Well, you have to I mean, that's a necessity.
Yes, it's very expensive to do a run in a kiln, so it's...
Depending on how large your kiln is, you know, it's not very cost effective to just put a couple of pieces in. You do want to put a bunch of things in it. So the size I've picked is something that I can work with for the number of places that I work. And it makes it, because the size that I had before was small, but it was just too small that I would have to do 1.5 loads, and you can't, you know, it just becomes logistically a problem. How much can you get on a bisque fire, and then you got to turn around your glaze fire, and you can't get as many pieces in as a glaze fire, and then all of a sudden the kiln, and you're also limited on like plates and things, how big you can make it that way. If you get a kiln that's really big, like Buddy's got a really large size kiln, then you do have to wait because that takes a certain amount of energy and you don't want to just fire it half full. You also run into certain technical problems if you run a kiln not completely full and you're firing mass. So you do want to have that. But hopefully my size will be fine. I just look at it this way. I had to take an unexpected hiatus from doing a lot of this work. I tried to piecemeal it to get my parents taken care of, my mom out here, and everything came to a stop in November, and we are getting started again. The gears are just doing this. They're just starting. So we're getting going, and it's, what are we in, March? Okay, so we still got time, because Christmas isn't here yet, so that's what I'm shooting for. So online, I'm a Studio at Etsy.com, and I actually have customers all over. I've sold internationally, and but mostly in the United States because international shipping is just hits. I mean, nobody tracks it, and then customs, and then value-added taxes, and it's just, to to me, it's not worth the hassle. So, no offense to my international customers, but sorry, come to the United States and buy it. But yeah, all over the United States, a lot of people from California and the West Coast, so good for them. You guys, Top Drawer has a few of my pieces. Damselfly Gallery does most of my coursework, but they're right smack in the middle of.
In the middle of horse country.
Makes a lot of sense.
And my friend Mary who runs the gallery, she said when Keelan comes, so right now I'm shoving pieces in Buddy's kiln, cause I haven't got a kiln. I'm like, dude, you gotta help me. So he's helping me turn around pieces.
Oh, that's great.
And Silo Mill in Urban, that's where I do most of the Estill County things, specific things. And then the Artisan Center bought a whole bunch of my work. So this year I'm hoping to do my application to Kentucky Crafted and the Guild. Maybe add an outdoor show, cause I got a tent for myself. Yay! Haven't even opened it up. Is that sad? I get
like that or you won't, and you do an
Have you
outdoor
thought
show.
about
I've
the
done
first
it.
Friday?
I haven't done any of that.
Just to get your.
No, I've done outdoor shows before, but I've always had to scrounge a tent from
Oh.
other people. This year I said, last year after I made some money, I was like, I'm buying myself a tent. Got my Costco membership and I write that thing down. And it's getting shipped, and it gets shipped on the day that I'm doing laminate flooring in the cabin. And he throws the thing up on the porch, the UPS guy puts it, I said, just put it right there. And that's where it sat
still
all
there.
winter long. Now it's in the garage. It still has the shipping label on it. I haven't even opened it yet. Whatever. It's fine. I have one. That's all I care about. So